Shalom Haverim. We are here for this episode of On the Road to Zion, and I am super pumped because probably one of the earliest follows or like kind of friends that I made on TikTok as I was getting up there was my good friend Lauren Kagan, also known as your blonde Jewish friend. That's just like, everybody's got at least one. And so bubbly, just really brought, I think, a lot of light to our community, especially to me. So I am so thankful to have her on to talk a little bit about her story. I think she has a really unique perspective that I think a lot of Jews here in America probably haven't heard. Everyone kind of looks at us white passing Jews, and they see us as all Ashkenazi from Poland and Lithuania, and even like Russia, like such as my own grandparents who are from now modern day Ukraine. But that is very different than what is an Ashkenazi Jew and a Soviet Jew. And Lauren is the daughter of two Soviet Jews. And so before I take any more of her own story away from her, I am going to bring her in. Lauren, thank you so much for being here.
I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me. This is so exciting.
Yes, everyone, by the way, this is her very first podcast, is what she said.
Yes.
So make sure to be nice in the comments. Make sure to definitely rate this 5 stars and tell all your friends, because in that way, she knows that she did a good job.
Please share me.
Yeah, exactly. So Lauren, why don't you jump right in? What is your story?
Yeah. So my parents, like you said, are both from the former Soviet Union. My parents were both born and raised in Babruysk, Belarus. And my parents immigrated here in 1991, 1992 because of the persecution of the Jewish people in when the Soviet Union was splitting up. My parents knew that it was their time to get out. And if they didn't go now, then they weren't going to leave. And they knew that for the future of their family and for their children that they didn't even have yet, that they knew that they didn't want their kids to experience the level of anti-Semitism that they had grown up with. So my parents immigrated here, and they were actually not married yet. They reconnected in the United States and ended up in Boston. And that's kind of where my story really begins, because my parents' story is my story. And I feel like I carry on what they have raised me with and their stories and the anti-Semitism they discovered. And I lead my life with that every single day, because I never expected that 32 plus years after they immigrated to the United States, we would be seeing what was happening in the United States post October 7th. And so I've been creating content for quite some time now, probably since I would say 2020 COVID, when everyone really downloaded TikTok in quarantine, the very classic. But at that point, it was kind of cringy to still be making content. And I just found it a fun outlet for me to make videos for my friends while we were isolated. And through that, I kind of found out that I loved making funny videos in regards to Judaism or Jewish tradition. And that ended me with a little bit of a following after I made something called the Jewish Girl Anthem back in 2020. And that was kind of my leading start, where it was like, hi, my name is Lauren. And I just talked about Jewish geography and the funny kind of things about being a Gen Zer in America. And it really connected with a lot of people. I then didn't really take content seriously until I graduated. And I started then, once graduating, started making a lot more content based on Judaism and based on just fun little traditions that I do around my house with my family. I then learned when October 7th happened that the world was not as forthcoming to the Jewish people and progressive as I believed that we were. And I feel like I grew up in a very safe environment where I attended Jewish day school my entire life. I was a part of the Chabad community at home. My parents really indulged me into the Jewish religion because that's what they weren't able to have. And I think that was the most important thing in my life, that I grew up practicing Judaism. I grew up learning about traditions, and I would learn about these traditions in school. And then I would go home and I would tell my parents about it, because it was something that my parents didn't even know. I would teach them what was on the Passover Seder, the I would teach them different prayers for Shabbat. Yes, they knew about it, but they didn't know it. They
Mm.
knew that this was a part of their story, but they didn't actually know why. So, can you imagine your little 6-year-old being like, "Oh, this is what we're going to do. This is the prayer that I learned." And that's kind of how they started opening up to being open to these types of kind of customs that they weren't accustomed to. In I really took that with me throughout my entirety of my life. Like I knew that I knew that I wanted to be a proud Jew and I wanted to understand what they couldn't. And so for me, it was a bigger deal to be able to practice these Jewish traditions. When I was at Jewish day school, like I said, I when I was in Jewish day school, my friends, their families knew everything. They were the very classic kind of suburban Jewish family that you would expect and that you see versus my family.
Jewish day school.
Yeah, versus my family, like, didn't know much. When everyone was having a Passover Seder, I was like, "Oh, we don't really do that to the full extent. We don't really read from the book. We don't do that type of stuff." So for me, it was more important to continue to learn and educate and understand these traditions so I could bring it home and I could bring this to my family. And I know that I am doing my parents proud with all of it. They know, and it's just really cool to see that the even though the world is in such a dark place, that I'm still using my light and that I'm not going to let anyone tear me down for it. And I think that you having a strong voice and being able to express it, I'm never going to let anyone take that kind of shine away from me. And I was raised to be a proud Jew and I will continue to be a proud Jew no matter who has an opinion on it.
I love that. It's kind of like your version of, you know, how like so many children who have, you know, like Asian immigrants or Latino immigrants that they say that they have to be the translator, like when they
Mhm.
do customer service. That's like kind of like your version. Like, like
Oh
you have
yeah.
to be you're like an 8-year-old being on the phone, like, okay, how do you say this part? Yeah, no, you say this part.
No, exactly, and I was the translator, like, my first language was Russian. I grew up speaking Russian. I was the kid that was coming to my Jewish day school with my Russian like, food and I would always be like, "Oh my god, mom, no, don't pack that for me.
No
They're gonna
borscht. No borscht.
no borscht, they're gonna make fun of me," and, like, my
But
mom
do
and
you like borscht?
oh, I love borscht.
Yeah,
My
no,
mom
my dad. Yeah, so does my dad. Yeah, big bowl, big borscht guy with sour
Oh,
cream.
big horse guy. Oh, yeah, there's so many all of the Russian foods now, I feel like I used to be so ashamed of it and so embarrassed of it, and now I'm like, I wanna cook it, I wanna know the rest I'll call my mom, I'll call my grandma, and I'll be like, "What's the recipe for this? I remember you used to make this. How do I make it? Teach me."
Is your
Because I
grandmother here too?
Yes, I
Yeah.
have both of my grandparents. My mom's dad passed when I was young, but I'm very, very lucky to have my grandma, and my grandfather. I am so proud to be a grandchild of Holocaust survivors, and listening to them and being raised by them as well was just an experience that I'm forever grateful for, and they are truly my best friends.
Wow. So can you go a little bit back to that? So that's so interesting what you just kind of said. So there's a couple of things just from the very beginning, and this might end up being a little bit longer because I think this is so fascinating. Because you mentioned that like when the Soviet Union was breaking up, like that is when your parents were like, oh, you know, we have to get out of here. But obviously you had so much anti-Semitism for decades during, you know, Stalin and everything. Out of that, you obviously have the Refusnik movement as well. You have a lot of, you know, there's the gulags, like everything of that. And yet, was there a reason why they didn't make like they didn't see that it was more important to leave, you know, whether it was, you know, in the 60s or the 70s or whenever like that kind of matter? I don't know how old your parents are, obviously, but or like what was the reason why they were less hopeful now that the union was breaking up?
I think it was that they couldn't leave. There was no
Yeah.
option to leave.
Hmm.
They didn't have the ability to do that. And then the second I think my parents were old enough. My mom was 24 when she came to the United States.
Okay.
I'm
That's
23.
I forget you're like 10 years younger, so like you're shifting, so that's my apologies.
Yeah, so I'm 23 now. My mom was 24 when she came to the United
Mm,
States.
Oh, so
I
she
can't.
was born in the 70s. So like first chance she got, she's like, I'm out of here.
Yes, and my dad, like, same thing, they were finally able to leave, and I think my dad finally was able to, like, rally the troops and be like,
Mm,
"Alright, like, mom, dad, his sister, they're like, we're out of here." Like, they put in their names into the polling where you kind of put your name to see if you can go to wherever you can get kind of a visa or
yeah.
to be able to leave, and got America and in and out. They were done. I think they my dad really experienced anti-Semitism, and just like hearing him talk about what he went through and how they had like the Jewish friend group and the regular kids, and they had separate buildings and they would eat separately and go hang out in separate places and you couldn't really cross over. And
Mm,
my dad was just, I'm not going to live this life.
yeah.
So, and I'm also really impressed with my mom. I can't think about moving to a completely different country a year from now, not speaking a lick of English, barely any money to their names, and they really just created an entire life for themselves. And it's just so remarkable that this and to like raise two children in a place that was so unknown to them, to be proud of their Judaism, that's I think the most remarkable thing. They're trailblazers to me and they're my heroes.
That's beautiful. And so, but, and then you also said though that you're the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors. And so, when you hear Soviet Jews, obviously the Soviets were fighting the Germans. And so, how did your grandparents end up as Holocaust survivors?
Um, when the war came, they ended up um different parts of the family kind of spread out to be able to survive. I
Mm,
have listened to their stories. It took a while for them to open up, and I still haven't fully heard the entirety of how my family is thankfully still here. Um, because it my grandparents wouldn't talk about it as much. They would talk about kind of the post-war aspect of still living in a world where Jews were so hated, and my grandmother would used to tell me stories how they would have to wait in a separate line to get bread and salami and cheese and all of their produce, and they would have to go after everybody else. And I remember that because that they were more open in regards to that. But when it came to the Holocaust and World War II, it wasn't so much talked about. And now my grandfather at 92 years old is starting to open up and share his story, and amazing on him to have that memory still. And obviously it's something you don't forget, but to be at his age, to still be talking about it, to now be opening up about his story, I think that goes to show that this was so real. It's still in his heart. It's still right there. Like, it's so difficult to talk about,
mm.
and it's taken him X amount of years to be able to get there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when they moved to Boston, I think that, I kind of sometimes will make fun of Boston because, they all love the Northerners love talking about like Southerners and how they're racist. And I'm like, dude, you're from Boston. Like, let's be real here. Um, what was it like, for your parents to be Soviet Jews? And I guess for them, like having been so repressed during their time. And I know that, one of the issues, for instance, for Soviet Jews in Israel, right, is, there's been a lot of controversy about the Israeli government, or specifically like the rabbinate, not necessarily believing that these Soviet Jews are Jews. So for them, what was it that really caused them to be so motivated to make sure that they had a Jewish life and that they had a Jewish life set up for their children, making sure that you go to Jewish day school? I mean, that's a big deal to make that kind of decision to send you to be a part of Chabad, right? To go from not from, you literally don't know what Shabbat is basically, to like, we need to go to Chabad. Where does that come from?
I think both of my parents knew from an early age that they wanted to express their Judaism. It just like wasn't allowed. And I remember my dad telling me a story how his grandmother used to never eat at the table with him and with their family. She would cook and then she would go, and she would never eat with them. She would use her own dishes. Later, for my dad to find out, it's because she kept kosher. and nobody in my family knew, and that she was keeping kosher, she was cooking separately meals for everyone else, and then she herself was keeping kosher. And my dad and that was my dad talks about it a lot. He was like, "It's so interesting that I didn't know that until I got older and like I really started understanding what was going on." And I think for him, he just wanted to be able to live freely and knew that what he experienced and what he had lived and what my mom had lived and experienced, they didn't want their kids to experience. I think it was something so in a way traumatizing, and so you were beaten down for being a Jew and you were beaten down for being proud of it. And I think that they just never wanted their kids to feel that way and to be proud of who they were. And I am so grateful that my parents sent me to get a Jewish education. And I remember on my bat mitzvah, we had our very first Shabbat at my rabbi's house. They and when you go to wash the hands, and my parents were like, "What are we supposed to do?" And I was like, "Just follow along. Like, I promise it'll all make sense." But it was such a beautiful thing that even my rabbi's family, they were so happy to have welcomed us into their home. They didn't look at my parents as any different from them. And to them, a Jew is a Jew, and that they were just proud that my parents were finally able to have a real Shabbat dinner with all of the traditions, go through everything step by step, and like experience it for the first time, because you don't know when they're going to experience it again. And that was something that was really big to them. And raising I think my dad always said, "I want you to know where you came from, and I want you to know who you are, and
Mm.
this is where you came from, and this is who you are." And for me, I take that with me every single day. That's why I continue to do what I do. It's why I continue to talk about my Judaism and talk about Israel. And I think especially for me, people misrepresent Judaism a lot, and I feel like there's a lot of misconceptions, and that you have to be this type of way or this type of way or do it this way, and there's just so many ways to express your Judaism and to be proud of it. And just because you might not know a lot, or you might seem a little bit less educated than the other, doesn't take away from you being proud of your Jewish identity and being proud of your heritage and your religion and your traditions. And there's always time and space to grow and learn them.
Yeah, I think that that's beautiful because I very much agree, and um, I want to kind of double down a little bit on that because when I opened up, I think that there's a crazy amount of misnomer about what does it mean to be a Jew and where do we come from and what are the kind of individual experiences of what feels like a monolith that the Ashkenazi experience is very different depending on if your ancestors come from like Russia, like mine did, or like modern day Ukraine that came over in after the pogroms, versus those who are Ashkenazi Jews who came over, as Holocaust survivors. Obviously, if you were a Russian a Russian Empire Jew, very different than a Soviet Jew, right? You're talking about 100, just really 100 years apart, but that those two are radically different Jews. There's a different, I was just in Mexico City, and when you, I took a Jewish tour. Highly recommend to go down there to check out the
Thank you.
community. And the guide was telling us about the difference because there's a really wonderful Syrian Jewish community. One is, but they're split. One is from Aleppo and one is from kind of the Damascus, Beirut area. And these two Syrian Jewish communities are actually quite different because of how they came over, when they came over, and who they were like when they came over. And the reason I bring this all up is because for you, when you say, what does it mean to be a Jew, and how can we be more accepting of what does it mean to really express Judaism? Did you find a lot of tension growing up when you didn't know as a child, right? You didn't have your parents teaching you, all of the, Shabbat, Shalom, like they didn't teach you that, like you had to learn that. And so how did that impact some of your experience with some of the other Jewish kids that you went to school with who did have parents that the traditional suburban Jewish life? What was that like?
It was really weird at first, I will say. I think that I didn't notice it growing up, like K through maybe fifth grade, until I
Sure.
like obviously got a little bit older, and I started realizing that, oh, like everyone's kind of doing this thing and everyone's going to temple or shul on this day, or this family's throwing a Purim party and you dress up and you're going to Purim parties. My family didn't do that. My parents, I dressed up for Purim when I went to school, and that was all that we did. Our friends didn't really celebrate these holidays. We didn't have full Passover big seders where we would invite all of these people, and that was really hard and it was sad, but I know that my parents were doing everything that they could at the time, and it was interesting to see that some kids would be like, "Oh, that's weird, you don't do that, you don't, your family doesn't, why don't you, I don't oh," and I would be like, "Oh, because my parents didn't grow up this way," or having even people's grandparents come to like run the Seder, or I would, or even the 4 questions on Passover. I would be I'm the youngest in my family, but I'm the only one that could even say the 4 questions. And because I'm the only one that learned it in school, aside from my brother, my older brother. But then there were the people when I came to high school, and I went to Jewish high school as well, that were like, "You don't have a Passover Seder? Come to my Passover Seder. Come with me. You're always welcome at my house on Shabbat. You're always welcome for this. You're always welcome for that." And that was the group of people that I really resonated with. And that is the type of person that I wanted to strive to be as I got older. I wanted to be someone that, even if you have non-Jewish friends, or you have Jewish friends, that I would have a lot of friends in my town that would say they're Jewish. And
I
I
hate
would,
I hate that, by the way. I hate that. It's the worst.
it's the worst. But growing up, that was a big thing that I heard. And for me, I would be like, why would you say something like that? First of all.
Yeah.
But that also has now inspired me to bring my love of Judaism to those types of friends and be like, come to my Shabbat dinner. Let me cook you a Shabbat meal. Let me bring you into my family. Let me bring you into my community. And I think that those are the types of people that are going to make the most impact. But it
I
was, yeah.
I know, I totally agree. I was actually just thinking about this earlier this afternoon because, um, I've been at the forefront of a couple of controversial internet fights around interfaith marriage and also patrilineal Jews. And one of the things that I've definitely kind of seen or gotten pushback on is, well, this is the law, and well, they're not Jewish, they're not there, or like whatever it is. Then there's this sense of shaming, and I thought to myself, when I was going through my Jewish education, I had extensive Jewish education, even though I didn't go to day school, but like I just, engaged in Jewish life in the most like way you possibly could, right? If there was something to be done that was Jewish, I probably did it. But even as such, like when I would go to like Chabad, and, my particular Chabad rabbi was, in my opinion, like somewhat unique relative to like a lot, where he was incredibly open and very warm when you asked questions, or if you weren't doing something, his way of approaching you was like, no, it's actually this way, but that's okay that you didn't know that. Like, I'm so glad that you're doing this one thing. I'm so glad that you're doing this one thing, as opposed to what I've been seeing a lot of very Orthodox Jews who, especially since October 7th, have really kind of like hardened around, no, it has to be this way. It has to be this way. It has to be this way. And if you're not doing it this way, then you might as well just like be a lefty anti-Zionist, a pro-pally, whatever it is for internet language. And to me, there's, I think, a clear pattern that says the more welcoming and open and warm you are to anybody and to everybody, that says, I don't care how much you know, or how little you know, or how much you do, or how little you do. I'm saying, if you want to do this, I'm going to help you. If you want to light Shabbat candles, I will give you Shabbat candles. If you want to, if you don't know the prayer for, over the challah, I'm going to teach it to you. And I'm going to tell you the meaning behind it. And I'm not doing that to shame you. I'm not doing that to make you feel stupid. I'm doing that so now you know. Now you know. And I think that we have such, people like you and me, I think have uh, very much a responsibility now, ever since October 7th, and now that we have our growing follower count, to take that into consideration. But it's funny because we didn't need that. We didn't need the follower count. We've been doing this for our whole lives. And so I think it's just beautiful to see more and more people who have been doing this and who do approach it from the same way.
Yeah, no, it's such a beautiful thing. I bet that's what I say all the time. Like I even if I wasn't taking videos of what I was doing with with my Judaism, I would still be doing it. This is exactly who I am on screen, off screen. I am the same person. I was like this in college when I was also in college during COVID. So my Chabad rabbi would drop off Shabbat dinners at on my porch during COVID. I remember they brought us a Chanukiah for Hanukkah, so I would have candles, so I would have something to light. And I lived with non-Jewish roommates during that time, and they would always get so excited. They would say, "Oh, that's so amazing! The Chabad rabbi came and did this. Oh, what are you doing now? What is this meal? Are you?" And they would just ask questions, and it didn't have to be so in your face, but it was just something that I would just share a part of my life that I would share with my friends, and it was something so small. I would go to Israel every summer and I would be like, guys, this is where I'm going. This is what I'm doing. This is what I'm seeing. This is the history of it. And I would just share. I didn't want to overbear them with it, but as long as they understood the importance of it and what this meant and the history behind it, then they were still learning something. It doesn't have to be so pushy in your face, but just understand that this is a part of my life. This is something that's important to me. Just like you guys going to church and Sunday mass is important to you. This is important to me.
Totally. And so, in that light, what is something about Soviet Jewry or the Soviet Jewish community, Soviet Jews, that someone's not going to know, and you want to, like, if there was the most critical thing that you want them to know about what does it mean to be a Soviet Jew or to be from kind of like this part of the Jewish nation, what do you want them to know?
Oh, that's a really good question.
I ask a
Oh,
lot of those.
yeah. You're a very critical thinker. A very critical thinker. Oh my goodness. I don't
It guys, I'm going to give you a little bit of time to think about it as I explain to the audience here, to the listenership. The reason being is because I'm genuinely curious. I very much, it's astounding to me what our people have gone through. And like I said earlier, my great grandparents moved here from basically what is modern day Kiev. Like it's kind of wild that like all four of my, or like all sets of great grandparents were like basically from like two villages that were like basically about 20 miles away from each other. And they came to America in just around like the turn of the 20th century. And you're talking about 100 years, just a single century, right? Between them and your parents. And the difference between those Jews and the Jews of your parents are radically different. And it has had tremendous impact on our entire global Jewry. You're talking about how all of the Soviet Jews who went to Israel and how they impacted that community, and what is different between them and the Jews that went from Russia to from the Russian Empire to Israel in the late 19th century. Like actually, like most of my grandmother's or my great grandfather had like 6 siblings, and all of them went to Israel, and he was the only one to come to America. And I don't know, I guess you consider that lucky or unlucky depending on who you are, but it's like, dang, like there was a good chance I could have been Israeli. But it's very different in how it's impacted everything, and how we think about Judaism, how we think about our people. So like I think this is such a wonderful opportunity. So now that I've given you plenty of time to think, what is the answer to my incredible question, that what is the one thing that you think is most important for people to know about Soviet Jewry?
I think something that's important is that I it's so tough because I feel like there's so many things, but I think it's important to note that we talk about when you talk about like even post World War II and that all of these Jews are white and that we all look the same and we all sound the same and this and that, we are very different and I think that we're not, my family has always been persecuted, just like the Jewish people. My parents, what, they were white in the Soviet Union, but they were still different because they were the Jews. And they were different because I, for example, like my family, when I look at my mom and my dad's birth certificates, it says Jewish.
Jew.
It says Jewish on them. And I remember I like very recently, post October 7th, I looked at that and my heart kind of like sank because that was something I can't imagine looking at your birth certificate right now and seeing Jew or on your passport Jew. And I just think about that this wasn't that long ago. This was 30 years ago that my parents were still experiencing this type of hate. And
I mean, I was born in 1991. Like that's my year.
yeah. So like my parents were still experiencing this when you were born, and which is why they left. And I think that's so important for people to understand that this wasn't 100 years ago. This was something that genuinely to my parents was just like yesterday in a blink of an eye. And I remember when October 7th had happened, my mom was like, this is my worst nightmare. This is what I lived through, and this was not what I wanted you to live through or ever have to understand. And I think that shows the resilience and like the the bravery kind of the Soviet Jewry, that even though they were knocked down many of pegs, many of times, that they're still determined to raise a future generation of Jewish children, especially in the diaspora. And I think that's a big difference between the Soviet Jews that are in Israel and the Soviet Jews that are here, is that we're living in the diaspora. We, like you said, you could have been Israeli. I could have been Israeli if my parents decided to go over there. I have a bunch of family that is there. And I visit them all the time. And it's just the way that I was raised. Being an American Jew is different than being an Israeli Jew. And I think that even though we do have that Soviet intersect, it's more separated, where when you go to Israel, you're immersed in the Judaism at
Yeah.
all times. You're immersed in it, versus here as a Soviet American Jew, you're not immersed. You have to go out of your way. And I think that's something that's so important, is that every Soviet Jewish person that you see in the United States, in the diaspora, that is advocating for Israel, that is proud of their Judaism, that is coming from the family values that are so instilled in us as Jewish people and our traditions. Because if my parents came here and decided, nope, like we just want to be like everyone else, we want to assimilate, I don't think I would be the way that I am. And it was really that kind of push. And I see that from many of my parents' friends, and the way that their kids were raised is to, was always to be proud, to be who we are. And I remember my family used to say, it's a good place to come from, a bad place to be.
It's like beautiful and awful at the same time. There's definitely like some type of like Japanese word that I just can't, like, that represents that concept, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I think, when you said that, it really brings up something that I've been thinking about a lot, because of how much American Jewry is centered around the Holocaust. And there's an obvious reason as to why. And I've done a lot of work with the book On Being Jewish Now and Zibby Owens, and a lot of the stories that were there, were from people who are like from New York, and they're like, oh my God, I couldn't believe that this is happening again. Like, I can't believe this is happening again. I thought this was never going to happen again. My grandparents my parents are Holocaust survivors. Like, how could this happen again? And I think to myself, and I've been studying a lot about our entire Jewish history, and it's like, actually, like, why we keep talking about, like, oh, in every generation they try to persecute us and they fail, and it's like, this is it, right? Like, this, we kind of like thought we were the exception. We're like, oh, I guess we have to be that generation now, huh? Like that, I guess it's our turn. And so I think to myself, like, one of the mistakes we made was like thinking that like our history has ended. But something that you just brought up, the stories that people say, oh, well, October 7th happened and I couldn't believe that this is happening again. But for your parents, they could believe it. Like, it's right there. And for you are the descendant, as opposed to someone being like, oh, well, my parents were Holocaust survivors but that was so long ago, right? Like, that equivalent in some way, shape, or form, right? And not to equate, necessarily being in a concentration camp, obviously, or anything of the sort necessary, but nonetheless, like the type of persecution that that Jews experienced in the Soviet Union was far more than what we know of. And so you lived it every day, like your parents, it existed in your house. And so, how did that aspect, how is that impacted? How did that impact you before October 7th? And does that impact you, or how does that affect you post October 7th?
Yeah. So pre October 7th, I always felt it. There was always this feeling of, for example, when I was applying to colleges, I was writing my personal statement and whatever that may be. And for me, my big thing was I wanted to talk about Israel. And I wanted to
Mm,
talk about living in Israel every summer from the age of 13 and spending my summers there and living and exploring and learning the history and how my parents were immigrants. And I went to a Jewish day school. It was not very like this university would know that I'm Jewish whether or not I wrote about Israel in my personal statement. But my mom said, please don't write about Israel in your personal statement. You never know who's going to get your application on the table. And I remember being like, what do you like? You're like, why? I was so mean. I was like the classic, like 17, like, what? That's so stupid. Like, the world's not like that anymore. Like, it's 20. I was like, it's
yeah,
2019.
it.
I was like, it's 2019, mom. The world is not like that. People love us. Like, no one's like that anymore. And my mom's like, don't do it. Like, I'm asking you, don't do it. So I didn't do it. I wrote about something else. But it was like that. Or we would go traveling and my mom would say, tuck in your necklace. When we would go and we would go to Europe, tuck in your necklace. Well, I wear my Jewish star, my Israel necklace, loud and proud. And my mom's like, tuck it in. And I never really fully registered in my head because I was like, you're being crazy. Like, the world isn't like this anymore. We have grown. Like, I do all of these things. I go to BBYO, I go to NCSY, like I can walk around with my Israel flag. I used to walk around campus with my IDF sweatshirt. I used to walk around
Yeah,
UMass just with my IDF sweatshirt when I would come back, like, and just be like, "Ooh, yeah, got it at the Shook." No one would say a word to me. I was like, "See, mom, the world's different. You don't understand." Or, "See, dad, the world's different. You don't understand." And then October 7th happened. And then I understood. And then I understood. And everything in my life shifted. I understood the warnings that my mom kept telling me. I understood when my grandfather would call me a shiksa growing up, and he would say, our favorite little shiksa's running around. And I would be like, why does he keep calling me that? Because I'm the only
man, so you're a
blonde.
natural blonde.
I'm a natural blonde, blue eyes, blonde hair. No one in my family else has this hair. And my grandpa would always be like, oh, you're a little shiksa. Like, oh, you're so lucky. You're so lucky. Never did I understand until October 7th. And everything just in my life kind of shifted. And I've always been very vocal and very proud about being a Jewish person in the United States and the diaspora about Israel. But after October 7th, it made me even louder because I, from going in a place in my brain that the world's not like this anymore, you're overreacting, you're over dramatizing. No, this was an underreactment from my mother. It was underreacting. I did not know that it was possible. And my parents were sitting there and they were kind of just like, it's
Yeah,
always there. It's so deeply embedded that you that it's just so difficult for me to comprehend. Even I used to date a non-Jewish boy back in college and my mom would be like, "Are you sure his family's okay with you being Jewish?" And once again, it didn't register
yeah,
in my brain. But now I think about it and and now I like sit back in my head. It's not good to dwell on the past, but
sure.
it's always like a thought now. Or if I meet a friend that's not Jewish, I always have to preface that I'm Jewish. Or if you're looking for a roommate, how do you feel if we have two separate pots and pans for meats and
Hmm.
dairy? Just trying to feel out the vibe. But now that's the world that apparently we've come back to. I thought we have evolutionized enough and it's been a crazy experience, and it's definitely changed just the way that I approach friendships, I approach any relationships, I approach life, which is a little sad, I think, because
Yeah.
I thought we had grown more as a society, but at the same time, it just goes to prove that your parents are always right.
No more goyish boys. No more goy
No more
boys.
Goyish boys.
It's right. I don't understand why you had to add the ish. The rhyme is right there. No more goy boys.
No
Like
more goy boys. I don't know. No more goyish boys. I thought
that's
it's
funny.
like your
No,
bubbies
well,
coming
yeah,
home from
the ish, the goyish. Yeah,
the
no,
goyish. Can't help them.
no, but it's true, and I think that everyone is in some way. Like, I mean, one of the kind of the reasons why like I got a tattoo is because like I didn't ever want the option of like tucking in because my grandmother actually did the same thing. Like, not to me, but my dad told me stories that when he was growing up in Los Angeles
Mm,
in the 60s, his
okay.
grandmother or his mom, my grandmother, told him, no, we don't talk about it. We don't do it. And so for me, it was a matter of like, and everyone keeps telling me, oh, well, I'm white passing and, I can hide my identity. And I literally went out of my way in order to make it so that I can't like no matter what happens, like this is what's going to happen to me. And I got no excuse for it. And, it is what it is. Um, but I totally get that from a perspective because everybody's that, but everybody I think is really feeling a lot about friendships and relationships. For you, what does that mean when it comes to like this? Because you have this background, right, where your parents didn't know anything, and you've been learning so much about Judaism, about the tradition, and then you have this also kind of like but then you have Jews who have this I don't like to use I don't want to use the word privilege, but a background where, their parents, were, their family's actually been here for like 150 years. They're like almost like super assimilated. They're like very, again, not to bash on Reform Jews by any means, but like, very Reform, and they're all about Tikkun Olam and the secularism. And they're the ones that are like, maybe not like anti, the people that, wearing keffiyehs out there, but they're, far more critical of Trump. They're far more critical of Netanyahu. They're far more vocal about what Israel is doing in Gaza than they are about what Hamas is doing or anything of the sort. How does that make you feel anything at all? And you can tell me like, no, I don't care about those people at all. But does that, I know at least for me, I would feel somewhat resentful, but like you had everything. You got to be Jewish for your entire lives, and now you're using it against us. Does that at all impact you?
I think slightly. I don't think I really think about it that much. I think it's more of the JV peers that I'm just kind of like, where are your parents?
Mm,
What are you doing? Not what are you doing?
yeah, no.
But it angers me inside because they don't understand the privilege that they did have. And I think also even thinking about when you think about privilege as a white person, yes, I experienced privilege being a white person in America, but also I'm a Jew in America.
Mm,
I'm not as privileged as the rest of you. And I'm not to take away from anyone's experiences or anything, but I think but people forget that when they say, "Oh, all the Jews are white passing," or all of this and that. It's like we are still a minority. People forget that we are still being persecuted. You see a Jewish star and someone is going to give you a dirty look immediately. It's not even going to ask you whether or not you're a Zionist because to them you are, even
yeah.
though I am very proudly, and I'll wear it on a shirt loud and proud. But it's how dare these people who don't understand what sacrifices are, or what they don't know. I'm trying to think of it in in a proper way to say it,
Don't worry
but
about it.
it's just how it is
Like,
kind of
how
a
dare you?
it is kind of a how dare you. Like, I am doing everything in my willpower to be able to know my history, to know my traditions, to be able to, when I one day have a family, that I can have a full-blown 4-hour Passover Seder like the rest of you. That's what I want to accomplish. I want to be able to do that. I want to be able to have the amazing break fast that everyone else is having with the bagels and the lox and the schmears and this and that. It's just I have been trying my entire life to feel this way, and now you're kind of it felt like a little bit like you're turning your back,
Mm,
but at the same time, I don't think kind of twice about them. It's just like,
totally.
"You know what? You're gonna do your own thing. I'm proud of who I am, and I'm gonna continue to keep doing my work."
Did it expedite a little bit more of like kind of, or speed up the process of like maybe becoming more traditional, like where you were before October 7th and now like
Oh,
after
yeah.
October 7th?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I think it's so funny. I was in Paris for a wedding, on October 7th for my cousin, and we had,
Oh wow.
yeah, and my Israeli family had flown in, and I was talking to them about the year that we've had, about the year that they've had. That was the first time
Mm,
I'd seen them in since, 2023,
mm,
and I was telling my cousin, I was like, "Yeah, I've been lighting Shabbat candles for a while now, but I've started lighting Shabbat candles every Friday. I try and go to a Shabbat dinner every single Friday. I have my tehillim. I say that my tehillim every morning." And my cousin from Israel is looking at me. She goes, "You say what now?" And I'm like, "Yeah." I was like, "This is my way to feel connected. This is
mm.
my way that it's helping me feel my connection to Israel, to my Judaism versus you living in Israel. You feel that on a daily basis when you wake up. And
Yeah.
I need to feel that type of community or connection to something." So I'm like, "Yeah, of course I've become a little bit more religious in the meantime. I'm not keeping Shabbat, but I am making sure that I am keeping some tradition alive." And I don't think I'll ever become a super religious Jew, and I don't think that's a problem, but even dressing more conservatively every once in a while
Mm.
is kind of a beautiful thing to me, and it has nothing to do with whether or not I'm gonna continue to become more and more religious. I just think it's a beautiful thing in Judaism to dress conservatively, to dress modestly, and just kind of implementing small things into my life. Just whatever connects with me personally. And I think that's what every Jewish person should be doing. If you don't feel like, I know I'm never gonna be able to give up my phone on a Friday to Saturday.
Yeah.
I just know myself. That's never gonna happen. That's not realistic. Maybe actually, who knows? But I don't think so. So for me, dressing modestly, doing a Shabbat dinner, that's my way of keeping kind of Judaism close in my heart. And I think, and then I can go out and go to a party or go to a bar, whatever I want to do else. But it's in that
No,
small aspect
no,
that's so beautiful.
absolutely. Like, I've been rapping tefillin almost every day basically over a year now. I went to Israel on a volunteer mission, and I got back, and I went to my rabbi and I asked him for about tefillin. He goes, "Well, they're like $600, but it just so happened I got very lucky that like my rabbi is a conservative rabbi who's like his big thing is like tefillin. Like he's just,
Mhm.
and so he has like all these pairs, and he gave me one, so now I get to rap.
Nice.
And but it's so interesting because I, for instance, like have an adamant like anti-kosher. I don't understand it. It's like the one thing in Judaism that nobody's been able to give me a good reason as to why we keep kosher or why we keep kosher still today, like all this kind of stuff. And yet, when we were in Mexico City, and everything is pork and pork and cheese and pork and cheese, and my wife doesn't eat any seafood, but shellfish and pork as just kind of like her way of doing it. And for me, I got back and I was doing it. I was like, I got back and I said to myself, like, I probably don't have to eat pork. Like, I always kind of gave my excuse of like the bacon, at breakfast or everything of the sort. And I'm like, I don't actually have to have the bacon, or like I can have chicken sausage instead of regular sausage, or it's like I don't have to get, something pork. I don't know if I'll ever give up like shellfish because, I'm a big like sushi and all that kind of stuff, but kind of like you, like maybe like one day, because, I think, I remember a different rabbi mentioned to me, and I've heard this metaphor a couple of times, which is like to be Jewish is to kind of like go to the gym, where it's like that's why you call it practicing Judaism, right? Like where it's like you're lifting 5-pound weights, and then you lift 10-pound weights, and all of a sudden you can lift 40-pound weights, right? And in the same way, it's kind of like, you just every single time you want to order something pork, even if you end up ordering pork, you're thinking about it. Like I am now thinking about like, yeah, no, I'm going to do it today, but I didn't have to, but I'm choosing now. It's an active choice as opposed to like, well, who cares, right?
Yeah.
And I think that kind of like comes into the beauty of how we both approach Judaism, what we've said, which is like, just do the one thing. Just do
Mhm.
one thing that feels like it's a little bit closer to Judaism, and you become better at the actual practice of it. But then also it encourages you to do more. You know, I used to have this piece of paper, like I'd have to literally read off the piece of paper of the prayers for tefillin. Now I'm good to go.
Yeah.
And so as we're kind of wrapping up here, you know, one thing that you obviously are very now known for, or that you very much like to put out, is Shabbat candles. You like Shabbat candles on video. You put out the lighting, the schedule of when you should light Shabbat candles. Where does that come from? Of like, why did that feel like the thing that you were going to kind of center your that particular type of content on? That's like, this is the thing that I want everybody to do.
I have always been a lover of Shabbat. I think the concept of sitting down at a family meal, bringing in the light, feeling the warmth, and reflecting on the week that you had and the weekend ahead is such a beautiful, beautiful thing. And I think when I started lighting my Shabbat candles when I was a junior in college, and when I was going through a very troubling time, and for some reason, I would light my candles on Friday night. I would take a minute to myself to light those candles before doing anything, going out with my friends, and it calmed me. It eased this anxiety in me, and I was like, "Wow, this is a beautiful thing." I was like, I get it. I get
It's
it. I
pretty
haven't lit
incredible.
candles since my bat mitzvah ceremony. I didn't understand it. And it was like, it's such a beautiful thing. And I think it's so easy to do. It takes 30 seconds out of your day. And that's why I'm like, anyone can do it. And a
Yeah.
big thing for me is that I prop my phone up, I light my Shabbat candles because even if you can't light your Shabbat candles, I want it to feel like we're on FaceTime together. I want it to
Hmm.
feel like you're not alone on a Friday night, that you're still with some type of community. You are I want to build this kind of connection with people. And even though it's through a screen, they can sit there and they can watch me light candles. And even if they're not lighting candles, they feel like they light candles with me. It's like they're not alone. They're bringing a little bit of Shabbat with them. Even if you see my video on your For You page and you're not Jewish, you still might end up watching the video. You're like, you know what? Yeah, like good for her. Like it's Shabbat. May she have a great weekend and cool for her. And then I continue on. It's just a small thing out of my day and out of your day that you can do that can just I think it changes my weekend. It changes my approach, it calms me down from the week. And I love the concept of Shabbat and the concept of being with family and the concept of being together. And I don't think it's specifically about the religious aspect of it rather than more of the communal aspect and the values that come with Shabbat and what Shabbat is supposed to symbolize to us. And everyone should experience a family dinner once a week.
That's beautiful. You can make me tear up. But it's very similar. Like I was thinking about meditation. You know, there's a big growth in like meditation out there,
Mhm.
and so everyone has all these apps, and they're trying to follow like the Buddhist monks. And I thought to myself, I was like, but we have meditation. Like Judaism has meditation, and so I wrap the fill in, and I say the Shema, the V'ahavta, I say the Matovu, and I say the Modani. That's it. I don't go through this whole shachri. But it takes me 7 to 10 minutes every day, and it's just the requirement that or the daily requirement that I put on myself to wrap that tefillin in the morning that sets, and I could definitely feel the difference between the days that I do and that I don't. And so for you, where do you go now? Because you obviously just hit 70,000 on TikTok, which is pretty dope.
Woo!
And where, you have, are you gonna, make your own line of Shabbat candles? Like, where do you kind of feel like you're, oh, she's shimming for if you're listening. She's shimming, so like she's giving this coy look, like she's definitely launching a line of Shabbat candles. It's just ready for the waiting. But where do you kind of see yourself as a creator within this space?
So hopefully it's in the works. I don't know how long, obviously, it's going to take, but it is because I work a full time job. I do content. There's a lot going on.
The
So
struggle.
it's the struggle. Also, no one being an adult is hard. That is something that I've been learning in the past like 2 years. Adulting is hard. So I am hopeful that I will have a Shabbat candle line coming out at some point. It is in the works. I am hoping to do kind of more of a trendy Shabbat candles and some fun merch coming soon. And I am just going to continue to keep sharing my Jewish joy and my Jewish light. And I hope that maybe a trip to Israel will be coming soon so I can go and make content with all of the amazing influencers over there and all of my friends over there and share their stories and share. I'm just hoping to share the normal life of a Jewish person and keep doing what I'm doing. And yeah, I don't know. I'm very excited for what's to come ahead, and I can't wait to keep you all posted as well.
It's very cool. I was so, oh man, I was like, I know where she's going with this. So last two questions. So I'll ask this first one, which is, what is your favorite Soviet Jewish dish that you like to eat or make or both?
Ooh, okay. So my favorite salad, it's called Salat Olivier, or like misnoy salat. It is our version of a potato salad, but it is my favorite thing. And when you think about all of the ingredients mixed up in it, it sounds disgusting. I'll tell you. It's like hot dogs or like a meat of your choice, potatoes, eggs, peas, carrots, pickles, mayonnaise.
What
And
is happening right now?
yeah, and it's this big salad. But I'm telling you, when you have it, just all of the flavors in one bite, it's the most perfect thing you could think of. And I know it sounds disgusting, and everyone always looks at me like I have 10 heads when I say it, but it's delicious, and I'll have to make you some and send you.
Oh yeah, no. Well, no, don't send that to me. I'll come
So
to you.
maybe next time.
Wherever you are, I'll come to you for that
Yeah,
one.
I'll make you a whole spread.
Yeah, I want to. Yeah, of a true. So, but just
I'll make you borscht
no,
too.
I'm gonna let you know right now. Like I'm just the beet juice. Like I can't, even if it's delicious, right? Even if it's like the most delicious thing, like I literally cannot bring myself to eat borscht because of just like the feeling of what it means to eat borscht. Because I
Oh
don't
my
like it. I
God.
just
You baby.
I will do it. No, I'll do it. I'll have a cup, right? But you got to make it real good.
I'll make it really good.
Maybe your mom or your grandmother have to make it.
Yeah, maybe
Yeah,
not I. I'll have my grandma make it
yeah,
for you so you can have
yeah.
like the real deal.
Yeah, I need her hands
Yeah,
crushing the beet juice into the
yeah,
pot. Like that's the flavor that I'm looking for here.
you need like the OG like
Yeah.
yeah.
Like if she
Not
wants
me,
to
not
like
my
make a fire, like, from, the rubbish of like
oh
whatever
yeah.
it is, and like put, like a 15-year-old pot that's been like just, hasn't been washed in like a couple of weeks.
Literally, they brought it from the Soviet Union. They
Yeah, no,
brought
I
it from
want that one.
Belarus
That's the
over here.
pot. That's the pot that needs to be made in. Anyway, so the last question then is, other than, because I ask everybody this, other than shawarma and falafel, what is your favorite Israeli food?
Oh, other than shawarma and falafel. Oh, okay. Shakshuka.
All right, nice. That's a good one.
Shakshuka,
That's a good
yeah.
one. That's a good one. Big fan.
Big fan.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lauren. Make sure everybody go and follow, so that way you have at least one true natural blonde Jewish friend on Instagram, TikTok, and we'll all be waiting patiently, maybe not so patiently, for some Shabbat candles.
Yes, thanks for having me. This was so fun. Loved being here.
Awesome. Everybody, thank you so much, and Shalom Aleichem.